So the topic is how to create Laravel API. But before we talk about the how, I want to briefly talk about the why. So you would have additional motivation to create APIs and start the mindset of APIs, and then you will understand why things are happening in a certain way. So I see two main ways how to structure the web project architecture: backend first and frontend first. And backend first was the first one and initially the only one. So you do stuff on the backend, which is PHP, for example. It may be something else, it may be Ruby, it may be Python, whatever. Then you transform all the result as HTML and CSS, and then add some JavaScript for some small effects like clicking the button opens some menu or something like that. And newer way, front-end first, this is where API comes in. So if someone enters the URL in the browser, then HTML and CSS and JavaScript is downloaded, so static assets, static pages, which is much quicker because you don't need to wait for PHP or Python to make any calculations or the database queries. So you download the static pages, and then that JavaScript fires the API calls to the server, which is PHP. And as you can see, there are three arrows here, so there's not one PHP, there may be multiple PHPs. So JavaScript fires to get the list of products, get the list of categories, get the menu, get the permissions, something like that. And then the page elements are updated as the data comes in from the server. And the main benefit of that for the user, for user experience, is the speed of actually loading the page. If you are waiting for the PHP for the server to process all the operations on the server, then you may wait for a second or two, or on bigger databases it may be longer. For the front end first, user gets immediately something, so the web page is already loaded with some elements maybe missing or loading placeholders, and then data pops up one by one with really small amounts of data. So that return from the API should be something like JSON format or some data, just like an array or something like that. So the data amount is much lower for every API call to compare with full PHP page with HTML and CSS. And the actual speed and user experience is felt when you reload the page. So you click another link, user clicks another link, and then in the backend first mentality, then the whole page is reloaded again. Again PHP, again HTML, again CSS, everything is reloaded. In front end first, any click would trigger JavaScript event, which will just reload the API calls and reload significant changes on the page. So some menus, some data, but only those parts would change without reloading all the page. And this is how API became a thing at all. So API is the bottom layer, and then in the middle, in JavaScript layer, it could be any framework or jQuery or even vanilla plain JavaScript. And then developers who used to be only PHP developers with some JavaScript, they have a choice now to remain only backenders and work only the API layer. And that is in itself quite a big area, and you may go deeper with database optimization, so anything related to strictly backend. So those are backend developers. But also you can become a full stack developer, so work with both API and with some JavaScript framework. Currently, looking at the market, more and more companies desire full stack developers. Maybe you won't be a professional level developer in both of those, but at least you would understand the front end and the back end stack. So you would be able to compile the full application. And final point, what about not web project? This is where API shines as an architecture. If you have API layer with PHP or Ruby or Python or whatever, as I mentioned, you can switch the front end easily. So same API calls may be performed from mobile applications, from your Fitbit, from your Tesla, from your smart microwave, whatever device. You just provide the API, the set of rules, what to call, what are the parameters, what is the structure of return data, and then front end could be separate. And this is how projects are transformed from just web projects, web team, to mobile team, to smartwatch team, and everything in between. So PHP or Laravel developers stay on the backend, and then front end grows with whatever systems or devices the business needs. So with that in mind, API is kind of the future, or even the present actually. So you may remain backend developer with some JavaScript, and that is still really popular on the market. But if you want to go with the trends and stay up to date as a modern web developer, you have to learn APIs. You may not want to learn the front-end frameworks like Vue.js or React or Angular, and that is fine. But every backend developer, every Laravel developer has to know how to create the API.